today's topic is nutrition in general practice. Okay. And I know that nutrition is a very complicated and sometimes a very touchy subject. Everyone seems to have an opinion on, nutrition and what's best to feed the animals, and it can be very confusing. There's also a lot of emotion connected to nutrition, so it's hard to know how to navigate this topic. And I think it's like this for two reasons. So one is that clients are familiar with nutrition from a human point of view. They mostly know how to feed themselves and their families, so they have a keen interest in wanting to feed their animals as well. And I don't know about in India, but in Australia and New Zealand, everybody seems to be on some sort of diet at some stage of their lives, whether it be low-calorie diet or a keto diet or intermittent fasting diet. So clients can see themselves as experts in nutrition, and they think that they know what's best for their animals, and so they don't want to listen to us as well. I mean, nobody tells you, oh, I know better than you about how to treat thyroid disease or how to remove the lump on my dog. They will always listen to what you have to say. But with nutrition, they often have all these questions and challenges to what you have to advise. The other problem is that pet food brands often bombard us with a lot of marketing and a lot of media, and each brand says that their food is best. So there are a lot of messages from the media and advertising, and it is very confusing to the clients, and it's also confusing to us as well. And sometimes veterinarian advice can sometimes be lost in all this marketing, and we can just be seen as another voice in this very loud kind of environment. So I'm going to try and keep it simple tonight. I'm going to try and just cover the basics of pet food nutrition, just the principles that you need to know. And I'll talk about things that are important, not only for you to understand, but for your clients to understand as well. We want to educate them so they can make the best food choices for their pets. So this is not a highly academic lecture. Hopefully it's simple enough for you to understand and then explain to your clients as well. I'll be covering the main questions that I get asked all the time. Almost every day in my practice, I get asked these questions. What do I feed? How much do I feed? What about chicken, vegetables, all these other things I want to give? What about the brands, wet or dry? So all these things. So hopefully they'll be useful for you. I'm going to be asking you guys a few questions. So at times you have to listen out, and you can unmute yourself when I ask a question, and you can answer the questions, or you can type in the chat box, and Dr. Dixon will be monitoring that to read out the questions so we can get a bit of interaction as well. Okay. So let's start off with a little activity. You can unmute yourself for this. So when clients ask me, what do I feed? We have to give them a proper answer. So this is a little matching game. All right. I said it would be simple. Can somebody please help me match these animals and the human at the top with these foods down here? Very simple. Any answers?
Let us answer in the chat box. Pedigree.
What are we going to feed the dog?
Pedigree.
And feed the dog with pedigree. This adult dog food down here. Perfect. What are we going to feed this child?
Some children eat dog food, so
Your children eat dog food. That would be easy.
no, the fruits and the other stuff.
Vegetables is meat.
Yeah.
Let's feed that to the child, which means that for the cat, we're going to feed this cat food. Okay. It's very simple. It's not a trick question. Basically, all I wanted to show for this one, if my computer is going to let me, oh my goodness, not freeze, basically is that dog food is for dogs, cat food is for cats. I don't know why it makes, humans want to make it very complicated. Oh my gosh, I apologize if my screen just freezes for a little bit. Sometimes it tends to do this, and we'll have to skip a little bit. Okay, so that's a basic that you want to get across to your clients. And I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more. The second question I often get is, how much do I feed? Okay, so people will say to me, I feed 1 cup per day. Is 1 cup a day good for my dog? And basically, I'll answer, I don't know. I'll say, what does it say on the feeding guide on the back of the pack? And they'll say, well, I don't know. I've never looked. So I always keep an empty bag of food in my consult room, and I show them the front and I show them the back. And I teach clients how to look up things for themselves. So I don't know if you guys, can you guys see my screen or not? See this? So basically, this is the front of the food packet, and this is the back. And on the back, might not be able to see it very well, is a feeding guide, okay? Where the clients need to look up and see how much to feed their dog. All right, how much do I feed? Okay, so on the back of the pack of the can of food or the bag of dry biscuits, you often have a feeding guide here, okay? And it will tell you the weight of the dog and how much to feed. If you're doing mixed feeding of dry food and wet food, it will tell you how much of a can to feed and how much dry food to feed as well. This is the back of a bag of biscuits. Again, the weight. And if you're feeding dry, this comes in grams, how many grams to give it. If you're mixed feeding wet and dry, how many grams of wet food and how many grams of dry food. Okay, so even if I know that the client should be feeding 1 cup of food per day or 1 can of food, I don't tell them that. I tell them to look on the back of the pack so that they can find out for themselves. Because what will happen is, if you tell the client you should feed 1 cup of food, and even if that's correct, they will forever feed 1 cup of food to every animal that they ever own for the whole life. Even if they change brands or change diets, they'll always say, the doctor said to feed 1 cup of food, and they'll always feed 1 cup of food. You need to teach people to learn how to work out how much to feed for themselves. Couple of things to note. If it gives the amount of food in cups, okay, you just need to make sure that the cup that they're using is what the company recommends here. You can see here at the bottom, 1 standard metric cup is 250 mils. It says it here on the side here as well. Okay, most of the time it will be a standard metric cup, but some brands will have their own size cups. And for example, you guys can see this. Okay, so this is a Royal Canin. Oops, let's see, a Royal Canin brand, which I'll be talking about. This is 1 cup, all right? And by contrast, the competitor brand, this is a Hills cup. I don't know if you can see them. Be it close together like this, okay? One is much bigger than the other, okay? So if you're going to use the Hills cup to measure Royal Canin food, you're going to be overfeeding or underfeeding your pet. So always just make sure that the cup you're using is what they specify on the back of the pack. Okay, just a note as well, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Royal Canin or Pedigree, just using those as examples. It's not necessarily because I particularly promote those brands. It's just because Dr. Dixon told me that they are readily available in India. There we go. So how much do I feed? Basically, I don't know, read the packaging. But what about all these other foods that I want to feed my dog? What about fruits and vegetables? What about chicken or meat that I want to give him? Or is oil okay? Is rice okay? Can I give it human food? And basically, this is what I say. I don't recommend human food or home-cooked food because it is not a balanced diet. It is very hard to balance a home-cooked diet without specialized supplements. I would have to sit down and analyze your dog's requirements as well as all the ingredients you want to feed, and then work out what your dog needs. And I'm not going to do that, and nobody is going to do that for you. Often you'll be lacking in many minerals and vitamins and get everything out of proportion. So for example, calcium. Now calcium is a good example because people are familiar with it in humans. I'll say that human food or human home-cooked diets commonly lack sufficient calcium for your cat or your dog, which they need for their bone growth. You know, humans get calcium from dairy, from soy, from nuts, but we don't give these to dogs, and we shouldn't give them to dogs. So often we won't be feeding them enough calcium, and therefore this will affect their bones. There's other things like, what about selenium? Are we giving enough selenium? And also taurine. So taurine is an amino acid. It's used in the building of protein. And way back in about the 1980s, quite a few diets, so cat diets in particular, didn't have enough taurine in them, and cats started to get retinal issues, so eye issues, and cardiac issues, dilated cardiomyopathy. And they found that was because they were lacking taurine in the commercial diets. Now, all the commercial diets have got enough taurine in them, and so we hardly ever see these problems, or I've never seen this problem. But that just goes to show that if you get the balance of nutrients slightly out, you can actually cause quite a few health problems. So what about all these foods? Basically, human food is not balanced. Okay. This is just, again, just to repeat what I said. Home cooked or human diet is not balanced. It is very hard to balance a home cooked diet if you're not a nutritionist, and I'm not a nutritionist. I don't know if many of you are nutritionists. All dog food and cat food that is marketed as complete and balanced will have the right balance of protein, calcium, magnesium, fats, vitamin K, all those things will be correct in there. If you feed a commercial diet according to the guidelines, then your dog won't lack nutrients. Okay? But in contrast, if you add in other human foods to a commercial diet, you will unbalance it. So if you're giving the dry biscuits, but then you add a lot of meat to it, you'll probably be giving too much protein, because meat is mostly protein, and therefore you won't be giving enough, fats or carbohydrates, that sort of thing. Now I'm going to talk about EFCO, AAFCO. This is important to know. It's important to know what it is and what it does. So EFCO is the American Association of Feed Control Officials. And this is a group of officials, of experts, that produce nutrient profiles or standards for pet foods. They produce the formulas. There should be an EFCO statement on all pet food packaging, which is complete and balanced. It means that the food has been formulated with the nutrients in the right balance according to these EFCO profiles. So if you can see here on the side, this is just one from a pedigree can. It says, pedigree can meets the nutritional levels established by the Association of American Feed Control Officials dog food nutrient profile for adult maintenance. This means that this food is appropriate and nutritionally balanced for an adult dog that is just having maintenance. It's not lactating, it's not pregnant, it's not, an extremely high working dog. Okay. So in other words, EFCO produces the minimum standards or the recipes for the dog foods. So just as an example, and you don't need to memorize these or know too much about them, but these are the nutrient profiles. So for example, for growth and reproduction in a dog, they need this much protein, they need this much fat, they need all these minerals and vitamins, and they'll also specify in which particular percentages. In contrast, adult maintenance here, you can see the protein's just a bit less. The fat is less as well, same minerals and vitamins, okay? Again, cats, protein 30% so higher, fats, all these things. You don't really need to know or memorize them. You can always look them up. They're readily available online. The main thing to note is that cats need more protein than dogs in their diet, and growing animals need more protein and phosphorus and calcium than adults. This means that you shouldn't feed cat food to dogs or dog food to cats, okay? So, as an activity, let's look at the back of the pack of these two foods. And my question is this a balanced meal? Are these balanced formulas to give to, this is a dog food, this blue one, and this orange one is a cat food. So hopefully you can see it on your computer screen. I don't know if it's on your phone, if it's a bit small. If you can unmute yourself or maybe type in the chat box what you think about this blue food. Let's go with this one first. Is this a balanced diet?
Yes.
Yes. And how do we know that this food is balanced?
Because it meets the nutritional levels established by EFCO.
Beautiful, very good. So you can see here, it's got this EFCO statement, okay? That yes, it meets the nutritional levels established by the EFCO dog food nutrient profiles for maintenance of adult dogs. All right. let's look at this one here. This is pure shredded chicken with 3 simple ingredients, 100% natural for cats. Have a look at this. Is this a balanced diet? You can unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box and Dr. Dixon will have a look at it. Oh, no, sorry. It's a balanced diet for cats. And why is it not?
Do you want me to answer everything?
Anybody else who's not my colleague would like to answer?
Megha has given that in the chat box, not for cat.
Oh, and Neha, how do you know that it's not balanced for cats? Any information on here that would suggest? I know it's very difficult. So maybe.
And then Dr. Nega says it's not mentioned about EFCO also.
That's right. So there's no EFCO statement on here. And I tell you, I looked at the rest of the can and there was no EFCO on there. That's right. And it even says pretty obviously here, well, with my arrow will come up, that this wellness course simply shredded boneless chicken recipe in the name of the food is intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding only. Okay, feeding information. This is a complementary food intended to be fed with a complete and balanced cat food diet. So it's actually telling you that this is not complete and balanced and it's only meant to be for a treat. Okay, so basically all the information on the back of the pack, and it is really important to know about EFCO and the statements because that's how we know their things are complete and balanced. I think you can mute yourself if you can. Okay. So then we have quite a few. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking. After that, we have a few questions. All right. So people say, but don't they need variety? You know, don't they need variety? Don't they get bored of eating the same thing? You know, my dog is very picky and I feel really bad, you know, just feeding it the same thing. Well, basically, if people say I need to give them variety, well, I say, yes, you need to give them a variety of nutrients, but this is provided by the complete and balanced food if it follows the EFCO formulas. If you're talking about a variety of flavors and textures, then basically, no, they don't need to have a variety of flavors and textures and colors. You know, that's a very human thing. Psychologically, we need, you know, to eat something different every day, something that tastes slightly different for every meal. But nutritionally, we could actually eat the same thing every day if it was balanced and we would be fine. And I always think a cow doesn't really get variety of colors or flavors in the grass, really, and they've done fine. You know, do they get bored of eating the same thing? Well, not really as well. You know, a cow will eat grass its whole time. A wolf will go and eat whatever it can eat. They don't get bored. If an animal is bored, you need to entertain it, but not with different foods. You need to take your dog for a walk. You need to play with your cat, or you need to brush your cat or give it attention and relieve its boredom that way. Some people say, my cat or my dog is very picky and it will only eat home-cooked food. Well, to be honest, we make them picky. We make them picky because we give them a variety of foods and then they decide that they want one and then they decide they don't want that anymore. So we give them another one and then we give them more and then we end up cooking for them and then they want the home-cooked food. So it is our fault if they say that they're picky. All right. And then some people just feel bad about giving them only biscuits or only dog food. They feel like they're withholding them something. If people say to me, I feel bad feeding him only biscuits, I just tell them, don't feel bad. I say, you can feel bad when they get orthopedic disease or they get heart disease because you're fed them an inappropriate diet. So always feel good about feeding what's best for them. The next question people will ask is, are expensive brands better? And the answer is yes and no. And for this, we need to talk about quality of the diet. So the difference between cheap brands and the premium brands is often the quality of the ingredients. So the cheaper brands might have soy or vegetable protein, and the more expensive brands may have chicken or meat protein, but both will have an adequate amount of protein according to the EFCO formulas, and they'll both be balanced. So a cheap brand and an expensive brand will both be better than a home-cooked diet, okay, because of the differences in the quality. So just have a little interlude, because I know we've been doing a lot of talking. If you have attended some of my lectures last year, you all will be familiar with my cat, Perchik. He often comes to the clinic and likes to hang out. I've got a few photos here to share. One day I was sitting down, this is my colleague, this is not me, and I was thinking she was sitting very strangely on the chair. And then I noticed this little tail that was coming out of the chair. And guess what? Lucky they're both small, because they were both trying to share the same chair at the computer desk. And guess who had most of the chair? My cat, Perchik. This is Perchik. My sister gave him a Santa costume for Christmas, and he was very thrilled at having to wear it and pose for the photo. And this is me and Perchik in our morning routine. I often like to have breakfast and then read my Bible at the same time. And just as an interlude, I just wanted to share with you, I'm a Christian, and I go to church. And just on this topic of me and my cat reading our Bibles together in the morning, my pastor at my church on Sunday was preaching from a verse from the Bible, and Jesus had said, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." So in other words, he was saying that we don't just need food for life, we actually need God, or we need to feed our spiritual sides as well. And I thought it's a little bit like our pets, cats and dogs. So they don't just need a complete and balanced diet. They need us. They need, owners and humans to have a fulfilled and happy life, that they can live up to their potential. They need owners that will interact with them and walk them and love them and care for them, not just feed them food, even if it's good food. And I think for me, I know we're all in COVID, and in Melbourne, we've been in lockdown for a very long time. And it's kind of highlighted for me our true needs. We need good nutrition, definitely, and we need protection from disease. But I will believe that we also need connection. We need connection with each other. And I think we need a connection with God as well, who cares and loves us. So that was just a little nod. Right, back to the meat of the matter. I often get asked, is wet food better or is dry food better? Sometimes people think that wet food's just rubbish, cans are just full of, high salt and everything else, and dry food is better. The answer is it doesn't really matter. They're about the same. There's the same formula in both of them. The only real difference is that wet food contains up to 80% moisture. So 80% of that can is actually water. In contrast, dry food is only up to 12% moisture. When I say dry, some people call it kibble, some people call it biscuits, some people say pellets. Just make sure you're talking about the same thing. Okay? So in a can of food, you're paying for up to 80% water. So therefore, it does become a little bit more expensive to feed, especially if you have a big dog. You might need to feed it this much wet food in contrast to this much dry food. So it can be more economical to feed your dry food. But nutritionally, it doesn't really matter because there is the same nutrient balance in both. And if you feed according to the feeding guidelines, then you can't go wrong. And I often compare it to something like cheese versus yogurt. So cheese, well, both of them are dairy products. Cheese is hard. There's not a lot of moisture content in there. And so it's quite dense. Yogurt, on the other hand, is a lot of liquid. There's a lot of water content in there, but it still has a lot of protein, a lot of lactose, a lot of calcium, just like the cheese, but this has got more moisture content. So it's very similar. Okay. So in the end, it's personal preference, but I've got a question for you guys. In what situations or which disease states might you recommend feeding wet food, or solely wet food, or more wet food?
Urinary disease.
Oh yeah. Is that lower or upper or both?
Both.
Yes. So, for example, I've got here liver and kidney disease. Yeah, So if a cat or a dog has got kidney disease, then we know that if they get dehydrated, then that can exacerbate the kidney disease and the azotemia. So therefore, encouraging them to eat a wet food with more moisture content can help to counteract the dehydration that they'll naturally face. That's right. Respiratory disease? Maybe. I've never thought of too much, but I suppose if they're coughing up a lot of, secretions or phlegm, they might be getting a little bit more dehydrated. Maybe the wet is a little bit more smoother going down their throat. If we've got a cough, often we want something nice and smooth. So I think that might be a good idea to feed them wet food. Anything else? Maybe gastrointestinal disease. Okay, so if they have a lot of vomiting and diarrhea, they're also more prone to dehydration. And so encouraging them to eat wet food, at least they'll be getting a lot of water content in that and prevent against dehydration. So that's just something to note for disease states. Some people will say or get worried because their cat or dog doesn't drink a lot of water. I'll say, for vaccinations, is your pet eating and drinking normally? And they'll say, oh, he eats a lot of food, but he hardly drinks any water at all. And they get very worried about that. But if the dog's eating mostly wet food or all wet food, they're probably getting most of their water intake through their food. So they don't need to drink a lot on the side. In contrast, some people will change food from wet food to dry food, and the pet will suddenly drink lots and lots more water. And they'll get very worried because they say, oh, now he's drinking lots. Does he have liver disease? Does he have kidney disease? So you've got to check that they haven't changed the diet. And if you're trying to measure water intake for, PUPD or any other diseases, you want to just check if they're eating wet food or dry food, because this will need to be taken into account when you're measuring their water consumption. All right, let's see if we can keep going. All right, what about premium brands? Premium brands include Royal Canin, like I mentioned before, and Pill's Prescription Diet and Pill's Science Diet. Premium brands are still equally as balanced as the other foods if they all follow EFCO. They do have higher quality ingredients, like we talked about before. They also have less fillers. So fillers are often fiber, okay? And fiber is good for the gut in certain amount of quantities, just like with humans. They pass through largely undigested and they end up in the feces. So if you have a lot of fiber in your diet, you'll often need to feed more to get more nutrients because it's sort of bulked up, and then you'll need to pick up more poos. So the premium brands are often more nutritionally dense. You need to feed less, you need to scoop less poo, and the clients often like that. And also the bag, even though it might cost more, the bag will often last longer than they think. So it's not always as expensive as they think it might be. And the main thing to point out to clients is that premium brands do food trials on their foods to test the safety and the quality of their food. So they will give a certain amount of dogs the food according to the feeding guidelines for a certain amount of days. And at the end of that trial period, the dogs will be examined by a doctor, and they'll look at their health status, they'll look at their weight, they'll look at all their vital signs and deem them healthy. And therefore, this food has passed the tests and will be able to be marketed and fed to dogs. So these premium brands go one step further than just formulating them according to the EFCO profiles. Of course, research and trials are expensive, so this food costs more, and they have to pass those costs on to the consumer. I just tell people that you pay for what you get, basically. With our pet food labels, we've looked at the back of the pack a few times, but one other thing to note is that all ingredients are listed in order of proportion by weight. And this is not just for dog foods and cat foods, it's actually for all foods. So human foods have to follow this regulation as well. So if you can see this example here, the ingredients list, you've got meats, chicken, beef, sheep, and or pork. Then you've got vegetables, binders, pasta, all the way down to flavor. So this means because meat is listed first, there'll be more meat in this can than vegetables, and there'll be more vegetables in this can than flavor. Okay, so that is kind of a good way to know what you're paying for. But you have to be careful. Here they've actually lumped all the meats together. They've said meats include chicken, pork, sheep, and beef. But if they were to pull apart those proportions of chicken and proportions of pork and other things, those would probably be much smaller, and you'd probably end up with more vegetables than actual chicken, or more vegetables than actual pork. So sometimes manufacturers will pull things apart or put things together to make them look like it's more or less. Okay. So let's look at these labels again. Another question for you. Which is the predominant ingredient in these two foods? Let's go on this one here. This is adult Australian mackerel dry food for dogs. This blue one, can somebody unmute themselves or type in the chat box? What is the prime or predominant ingredient in this food?
Mackerel meal.
Mackerel meal. Yes, the mackerel meal is listed first. So that's the mackerel fish. Okay, so that is the predominant ingredient. Right. What about this one? This one's the pedigree. And can we see? Sorry. Yeah, which is the predominant ingredient in this?
Cereals.
Cereals, exactly. So you can see the difference between, say, a more premium or expensive brand. They've got mackerel, as their prime source of protein. And on the other hand, pedigree, which is still equally balanced, they've used whole grain cereals as their main ingredient. And after that, then they have meat and meat byproducts. Okay. So you can, when you go shopping, and even if you look at your foods in your cupboards, you can turn on the back and see what's in there the most. You might get a shock. All right, let's go to our next slide. If this will let me, I think it won't. I'm sorry I have to keep doing this. I actually just need a new computer. We've got another matching game coming up, okay? This one is slightly more complicated, but you guys will be able to do this. So we've got 4 dogs up the top here, okay? And we've got 4 different types of food down here. So, can I have some of our VetNet participants from India have a look at these and tell me which foods are we going to feed these dogs? So at the top here, we've got this bulldog. His name's Otto. He's the dog of my manager, and he's about 5 or 6 years old. What food out of all of these ones should we feed him? Can you guys see that?
Pedigree puppy for
The puppy food?
second picture. Pedigree puppy.
Puppy puppy? He's 5 or 6 years old. Did I say 5 or 6 months?
5 to 6 months.
Sorry, he's 5 to 6 years old. Do you want to change your answer? Which one did you want to feed him?
Senior vitality.
Senior vitality?
Yeah.
We'll give that to him soon. It does say adult 7+ here. Can you see? Might be a
7
bit
plus.
7+. So maybe not this puppy. This one here. Adult. Okay. So he's 5 or 6 years old. He can have this adult food here. What about this puppy? All right, this puppy is young. I don't know how old it is. It's a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, small puppy. And what food do we want to feed this little
Pedigree puppy.
pedigree puppy? Let's do that. Okay, good. Pedigree puppy. Let's feed that to the little one. Now this one is looking quite old. It's a pug or something. It's got grey hair. This one can have the senior vitality. Yeah. Above 7, which means that this one here, which is a German Shepherd puppy, can have the puppy Maxi here, adult weight 26 to 44 kilos. Perfect. So what I wanted to show with this little matching game is that puppy food is for puppies Adult food is for adults and senior food is for seniors. It's very basic, but clients often don't understand that. And we have to be very clear to them on how to feed their dogs. The nutritional requirements between adults and seniors is not that different, okay? We class seniors as 7 to 8 years plus. And I know it's a generalization because a cat can live up to 20 years of age if it wants to, whereas a German Shepherd is probably not going to live much past 10 or 11 years of age, maybe a bit more, but I wouldn't expect it to live to 20. So 7 to 8 years of age is just a generalization, but it is a good time to start thinking about changing them over to a senior or a mature diet. But because there's not a lot of difference between that and an adult food, if clients have an adult dog and a senior dog in the family, they can both eat adult food and still be fine. But there's a greater difference between puppy food and adult food. So if you have a puppy and an adult in the household, you can't feed them the same food. All right, let's talk about puppy food a bit more. So large breed puppies or large and giant breeds grow slower and they reach maturity, meaning skeletal maturity, so full bone growth, at around about 18 to 24 months of age. And so they need a different balance of calcium and phosphorus because they're growing slower. So therefore, a large or giant breed dog should be fed large breed puppy food until 18 to 24 months of age. Okay, so not just any puppy food, large breed puppy food. And most good brands will have ones that say, look like this, Eukanuba, puppy, large breed. Okay. Small and medium breed puppies, on the other hand, they reach maturity around about 12 months of age. So they can be fed regular puppy food up until 12 months of age and then switch to adult food after that. There's actually not much difference in the nutritional requirements between small breed puppies and medium breed puppies, so they can actually be fed the same thing. And some brands won't differentiate, they'll just say puppy. And just note that when we say small breeds and large breeds, we mean the actual type of dog and the breed of the dog. It's not how big the dog is at the time. So you can see here, this is puppy mini, and it says for dogs up to 10 kilos, it actually says adult weight, 10 kilos. So this is for any breed that will reach 10 kilos in weight when it's an adult. I once had a client, and there's probably more out there, that was feeding her Rottweiler puppy, this mini one, because at the time the puppy was very small and was less than 10 kilos. So they were going to feed it mini when the puppy was small, and when it grew bigger, they were going to feed it medium, and then when it grew bigger, they were going to feed it puppy maxi. That's not the way it works. It's by the adult weight of the dog. How do we know what the adult weight will be? Sometimes it's very difficult to know, but you can generally go by looking at the mother and the father to see how big they were, or you can just kind of guess according to what breed they are. I'm really interested to know, in India or in whichever country you are dialing in from, what are some common large breed or giant breed dogs that you see? You guys share which large breed dogs you usually see, or which ones are common?
German Shepherds.
German Shepherds. Another trick question. St. Bernards we've got here. All right. Any other answers? Great Danes. Okay. Labs. Yep. The labs are quite popular all around the world. Any other big dogs in India that you commonly see? You can unmute yourself. A Rottweiler. Okay, cool. Retrievers. Okay. Yep. Golden Retrievers, Lab Retrievers, Great Danes. Okay, cool. All right. So mainly the same with, like, around here, we see a lot of these sort of dogs as well. So that is really important for them, to have these appropriate puppy food. Just going to see if my computer will do this. The other thing to note is on the back of the pack, when you have the feeding guide, often they'll have the adult weight here as well. So this is an example of a Royal Canin one. So it's adult weight here, the age of the puppy here, and how much to feed it. So on this one, if the adult weight is 10 kilos and the puppy is 2 months old, you want to feed it this amount. If the adult weight's only 6 kilos, then you want to feed it this amount. It's not when the puppy is 2 kilos, you feed it this much. When the puppy is 6 kilos, you feed it this much. Okay, it doesn't work like that. So teach the clients to read the back of the pack really carefully. Otherwise, they'll be overfeeding or underfeeding their animal. Okay, I'm going to show you this video now. This is a video of a client's dog that they emailed to me. She's an American Staffy, I believe. I don't know how old she was. I think maybe 5 or 6 months old. And he emailed and was worried because she had some deformities of her limb. So if you see her running, and if you see her at the end, if you look out for her right leg, you'll see some deformities there. So let me see if I can play this for you. You guys see that? Okay, there's no sound, it's fine. So she's running. Okay, can you guys see her leg here, how it's bent over? That was how she walked normally. Okay, she wasn't born like that, but as she grew, her leg started to curve over like that. And I asked the owner what he was feeding, and he said he was feeding puppy food, but he wasn't feeding large breed puppy food. It was just regular puppy food. And therefore, the calcium and phosphorus ratio in that food was not good for her, and she ended up having this limb deformity. As far as I know, I didn't actually see them again. As far as I know, they transitioned onto a large breed puppy food, and then she was fine after that. But this is what can happen if they're not on the appropriate diet. Oops, let's not play that again. Let's go to the next slide. And in case you're still not convinced, this is a paper, I think it was 2009, that came out, Angular Limb Deformities in a Giant Breed Puppy. Okay, so you can see here, this is a large breed dog, 6 months old, very, very big. And he had bilateral carpal valgus, so the legs were turning outwards. It's a bit small, but can you see here? The patient was being fed a homemade diet of raw whole chicken, vegetables, vitamins, and minerals. Does that sound familiar? I'm sure a lot of owners and even some of us might be feeding our dogs this much. Okay. With the onset of forelimb deformities, the dog was treated with vitamin C, but there was no improvement. Okay, so this is what can happen if we're not feeding growing dogs, especially big growing dogs, the right appropriate balance, especially of course calcium and phosphorus. This dog was actually treated with surgery, apparently to correct it. I was just reading the paper, and they transitioned it onto appropriate diet, and then when it was older, it didn't have any other issues. The next slide is just on breed-specific food. Okay, so some brands will have specific food just for Labradors, and some for specialty cats, and this one's food for French Bulldog. Basically, there's no real benefit in feeding your specific breed, your specific diet. If you want to feed your Dachshund food, that's totally fine. But there's no real difference in the nutritional requirements between all the different breeds, only in large breeds and when they're puppies. Okay, so this is kind of like a marketing ploy, I suppose, but it's not bad. It definitely doesn't hurt to feed these types of breeds. Okay, it's all balance, which is the main thing. Pregnancy and lactation. All right, so in the second half of pregnancy, you want to double the rations. This can be for dog or cat, because obviously they've got growing fetus or feti in them. In the third trimester, so in the last 20 days, you want to transition the mother onto good quality puppy food, but not large breed puppy food, just normal puppy food. Or in the case of cats, you want to give it kissing food. During lactation, keep her on puppy food, but you want to triple the rations. Feed her 3 times as much as she would normally eat because she is lactating. And it can be very tempting to supplement with calcium. We know in large animals, with our sheep and our cows, often we'll give them calcium after birth, and sheep sometimes before birth. But we don't need to do this in dogs or cats unless we have diagnosed them specifically with hypocalcemia, and that should be done by a veterinarian or a doctor, not by the owners. Sometimes giving calcium will be detrimental to the development and to the whole situation. So don't give them calcium unless you know that they're hypocalcemic. Sick patients. So with an acute vomiting or diarrhea case, sometimes we will tell owners at home to feed them a little bit of chicken and rice. This is very bland. It's a bit of protein there and doesn't upset the gut anymore. Obviously, this is not a balanced diet, so it can only be used in the short term for a few days while the patient is recovering. And after that, you transition it back to their regular dog food. Continue to eat chicken and rice, so you have to make sure that the clients know that they need to transition them back. Royal Canin gastrointestinal food is a good food to feed. This is a balanced diet. If you can't buy it in your pet clinic, you might be able to find it online. But we sell a lot of this for patients with an upset stomach. Okay? It is dry form and it's easily digestible, and they can go on this long term if they need to. For anorexic or sick animals that won't eat, especially in the hospital, we often will use Royal Canin Recovery. This is a wet food that comes in a can like this. It's a bit of a pate form, and if you warm it up in the microwave, it becomes very soft and mushy, and you'll be able to syringe feed it or put it through a syringe. It also smells very nice when you warm it up. So it's good for patients that are a little bit nauseous or don't feel like eating. Sometimes you can tempt them to eat with this. It is quite high in calories, nutritionally dense, because patients that are sick will often need more energy. And it does have a higher fat content, so you might want to avoid it in patients that have, for example, pancreas. I usually tell my nurses with any sick patient, you can offer it some of this. You can give it chicken, basically feed it anything it will eat. It's very important to keep our sick patients eating to avoid things like fatty liver or hepatic lipidosis, especially in cats. And also because the cells of the gastrointestinal mucosa need to have food that's given orally for them to be able to have enough energy. So if we don't have enteral nutrition or oral nutrition, we risk having the mucosa sort of dying away and sloughing off. So if we need to syringe feed them or force feed them, force feeding sounds bad, but basically just putting food into the mouth and trying to make them swallow, then we need to be doing that, not just putting them onto a drip. Okay. I'm going to revisit this slide again because I know there'll probably be still some questions about it. Okay, what about all these foods? Are you sure I can't feed it a little bit of carrot, or I can't throw it a little bit of chicken, or give it a little bit of rice, leftovers? So animals can and can't have, then it is okay to give them some of these foods as long as it's not toxic. Okay, so some foods we should definitely not give because they're toxic to animals. For example, grapes, toxic. Onions and garlic are toxic, and I definitely wouldn't give it any curry or roti that might upset the tummy. But these other things, in and of themselves, they're okay to feed the dog. The dog shouldn't react to it horribly. Okay, so if you really want to feed it a little bit of chicken on the weekends, or you want to throw out some banana pieces as a treat, or give it some leftover rice occasionally, this shouldn't upset the balance of the diet too much. But just know that your dog or cat will always eat your food before it eats his food, because they always like to eat our food better, or our food more. It's more yummy. So if you end up feeding it quite a lot of this food, the dog will probably eat your food more and it will leave behind its biscuits or its dry food, and then you'll unbalance the diet. And they can get quite fat on this food as well. So just be aware of this. But otherwise, as long as it's not toxic, if you need to feed a little bit of it, that's fine. And I get asked about bones a lot. It's also a little bit of a tricky question. Are bones good? The answer is yes, kind of, and no. So bones are good because if they gnaw on them, they can help to clean the plaque and tartar off their teeth. Okay, so you end up with nice shiny teeth, but bones can also break their teeth. So you can have nice shiny teeth, but they're broken, okay, fractured like this. And it's very difficult to treat and then remove these otherwise healthy solid, broken or fractured teeth. They can also cause gastric perforation if they ingest the bones and they poke through the lining of the stomach. They can cause foreign body obstruction, and then they can cause constipation as well. So this is everything that we want to avoid. So if clients really want to feed bones, if you really want to feed them, you have to make sure that they are raw bones. Cooked bones are more brittle, so they're more likely to break or splinter. So raw bones are harder. Make sure they're big bones. Often we say as big as their head, or I tell people like the femur bone or the brisket bone, one that's nice and large. And they are to chew on them. So just chew off all of the gristle and the sinews and the tendons. And then once it starts to break up and they actually start to ingest some of it, you need to take it away. Their bones are to chew on and not to chew up. But the other thing that they can get from bones is, say, salmonella infection or campylobacter, because if it's given raw, they can have these bacteria on it. So you have to be careful as well. But these are the principles if you're going to feed bones to your animal. I see we had one question here. I'm just going to answer this last one, and then the rest we can answer in the question time. Indian, most of the pet owners offer roti to their pets. Yeah, I can imagine, and I think in New Zealand and Australia, a lot of people will give pieces of toast or bread to their pets as well. So flour and the cereals and the grains in there and a bit of butter and water and things in itself shouldn't be too harmful. But the same principles of if you give it too much, then you're going to make it fat. You're going to make the diet unbalanced because it won't be eating more of its appropriate diet. Let's see. Yeah. And then I think this is one of my last slides. It's on transitioning. Okay. So transitioning is very important to explain to clients when you're recommending a new food, or if you're selling a bag of food. This is how to shift from one diet to another. You need to do this carefully, otherwise the pet may not eat it and the clients won't come back and buy any more food. On the back of the pack, they'll often have a transitioning guide like this, and it'll say something like, on days 1 to 2, the first few days, you're going to offer 75% of the old food, 25% of the new food. And the next few days, you want to give 50% old food, 50% new food. And then the next few days, 25% old food, 75% new food. And then by day 7, you might be on 100% new food. Okay. And most pets, if they're not too fussy, 7 days will be enough. And there'll be enough for the gut to adapt to the new food as well. But you can basically take as long as you need to get onto the new food. I had one specialist saying that she never had a patient that she couldn't transition onto a new food. So she met all her patients, even her really sick patients, she was able to transition them onto their new food. She just did it very, very slowly, and she had really committed clients who were willing to do that. So with really fussy patients, I will tell the owners to just give, say, 1 to 2 little biscuits of the new food in with the old food and do that for, say, 1 week. Mix it all together so they can't tell, so they will eat it, and do that for 1 week. Then the next week, you can put maybe 3 or 4 pieces of that dry food in and take out 1 teaspoon of the old food. Okay, so you can do it very, very slowly, as long as you need. It might take 1 or 2 months to transition it onto the diet, but in the end, it'll be worth it, especially if this animal has to be on this food for the rest of its life or until it's fully grown. And food aversion is something we need to be thinking about. Food aversion is when an animal is ill, it feels nauseous, and then you give it a new food, and so it forever associates the new food with feeling sick and nauseous, so it won't eat that food again. So to avoid this, then we need to be giving the new food when it's completely better. So in the hospital, I say feed it whatever it wants to eat, get it better, and when you go home, then you start to transition onto your new food. Don't start transitioning when it's sick. What about grain-free diets? So I understand from Dr. Dixon that you don't have a lot of grain-free foods. in India, maybe not yet. It is definitely very popular in the US and in Australia and New Zealand. A lot of food is grain-free. Basically, there's no real proven benefit that grain-free food is better. The research really isn't there. A lot of it comes from just the human, I guess, fad, or the human gluten-free phase that we're all kind of in at the moment. As long as it has the EFCO statement on it, it will still be balanced, so it's fine to feed. A lot of people will say that they transition from a regular food to a grain-free food, and the animal was suddenly much healthier, or the skin was much better, or the feces were more solid. And there might be a small percentage of dogs, maybe, that are allergic to grains, but I think most of the time they've just transitioned from a low quality food to a higher quality food, because a lot of these grain-free diets tend to be sort of more expensive brands, so they're using more higher quality ingredients. And so the animal has responded to the higher quality, not necessarily the absence of grains. And in the US, and maybe not recently, but there have been some cases noted of dilated cardiomyopathy, so DCM, cardiac issues related to potentially the lack of taurine associated with grain-free diets. So the link isn't super clear, but there is a bit of a suspicion that grain-free might actually be a little bit detrimental, especially to the cardiac system. So you just got to be careful, again, showing that if you're not in the right balance, bad things can happen. One slide on rabbits. I'm also not an expert on exotics, but I had a request to put in a slide about rabbits and rabbit nutrition. A lot of diseases in rabbits are caused by poor nutrition, so you need to do an adequate sort of history taking before you launch into any other sort of diagnostics. And rabbits are special because they need to keep eating to avoid gut stasis. If their gut stops working, then they will have issues in other areas of their body as well. Okay, so for an average rabbit, they will need fresh leafy vegetables, about 2 cups per kilo per day. So if you've got a 2 kilo rabbit, it's going to need 4 cups of fresh leafy vegetables per day. So that's quite a lot. Avoid iceberg lettuce because it can give a bit of diarrhea. And you need to limit the fruits and fruits, I suppose, apples and berries and things, and also limit the carrots as well, because these are high in carbohydrates and then high in sugars as well. And they can get quite obese if you eat too much fruits or root vegetables. So the leafy vegetables is the way to go. Then you want to give them unlimited hay and grass. Remember, they are hindgut fermenters, so they need a lot of fiber to keep them going. And then you can give them a small amount of pellets as well. They actually technically don't need pellets at all. A lot of people think that you should only feed rabbit pellets and that is rabbit food. The truth is they don't need pellets at all. But if you want to feed them, you can just give them a small amount according to the back of the pack. It's sort of like giving them a vitamin and mineral sort of supplement, but it's definitely not the bulk of their food. If they are sick, then they need to keep eating to avoid the gut stasis. This is a really useful formula to give them. It's called Oxbow Critical Care. It's actually suitable for lots of different exotics. You've got hamsters, marsupials, rabbits, guinea pigs, turtles, reptiles. It comes in a powder, and you mix it up into a little slosh like this, and then you can syringe feed it. And that is very useful for keeping the nutrition. Okay, so in summary, if there's only a few take-home points, these are the ones to talk about. Okay, so cat food for cats, dog food for dogs, human food for humans. Look for that EFCO statement on the back of the packaging to make sure it is complete and balanced. Wet food and dry food, there's not a lot of difference. It's personal preference. You pay more for the wet food in general. Okay. Puppy food until 12 months old, then give them an adult diet, unless they are large or giant breed, in which case they'll need large breed puppy food till the 18 to 24 month mark. Feed according to the feeding guidelines on the back of the pack, and then transition them slowly. So hopefully after all of that, you've seen that it is quite simple, and I'm happy to then take any questions. So I start my screen sharing.
Yeah. We have come to the end of the webinar. Thank you for staying till the end. And if you still have any questions, you can put in the chat box or you can ask. And oh, something is there. Some doctors give advice not to give heavy feed when pets have diarrhea. Please clarify.
Yeah, that's right. So in the olden days, I suppose they used to advise withholding food for 24 hours with diarrhea to let the stomach settle. That is not the advice now. The animal definitely needs to keep eating enteral cells hydrated and nourished, because a lot of the, like I said, the mucosal cells of the lining of the small intestine and the stomach, they actually get their nutrition directly from absorbing, you know, food that's in the gastrointestinal tract. So we feed them a little bit. But I suppose, yes, it's not a good idea to feed them a lot. Some animals don't have a lot of self-control, and if they're hungry, they'll eat a lot and then they'll probably vomit it back out, or maybe it might go through them and they'll have a lot of diarrhea. I suppose it just depends on the severity of the diarrhea and how sick the animal is. And, you know, if they have a gag reflex, then, you know, if they vomit, hopefully they'll be able not be able to aspirate. Of course, it's not good to feed an animal that's a little bit comatose, a lot of food, and have at risk of aspiration. So in general, we tell them, you know, small amounts of food, but frequently, so they keep up their nutrition. But yeah, maybe not sort of heavy amounts or large amounts of food. Does that answer your question?
There's one more question in the chat box.
Discussion on hypocalcemia in pregnant animals and which stage in dogs and cats. Yeah, I haven't seen much hypocalcemia, to be honest. It is a little bit hard to diagnose, I suppose. In dogs and cats, you will see it after birth. And we call it sort of eclampsia. I suppose like in dogs, large animals, milk fever. They'll often get quite sort of rigid. Calcium is needed for muscle contraction. And they can have, you know, very high temperatures and just have almost like neurological or, you know, sort of problems with movement and things like that. It's mostly after birth. And you can supplement them with oral calcium. That's probably the easiest way to do that if you see it and diagnose it. You can try intravenous formulations, but to be honest, I haven't done it for so long. And it is hard to diagnose specifically because there's a difference between ionized calcium and then the calcium that we run in our in-house blood machines. So sometimes we don't know exactly if it's hypoglycemia or hypocalcemia. Going to cause difficulty in parturition? Not usually. Most of the time you will just get sort of exhaustion. So like inertia, so myometrial inertia, or potentially obstruction. So if they're on a good quality puppy food during pregnancy, that will have enough calcium in it to last them, you know, through lactation and everything like that. So most of the time, difficulty in parturition are due to fetal positioning. Yeah, so obstruction or just, you know, exhaustion, inertia.
How giving fruit juices to the dogs which are suffering from diarrhea or some vomiting?
Yeah.
Fruit juices.
Fruit juice. Yeah. So I suppose it is a source of glucose, so sugar, energy. So I suppose that's, you know, a way to get energy into them. And of course, it's a source of fluids as well, so oral hydration. Do you have any electrolyte solutions that you can buy for cats and dogs over there? Because to be honest, that would probably be better because it's got more electrolytes, replacement electrolytes than just fruit juices. But I think if you didn't, then it's probably all right to give, yeah, the fruit juices.
Thank you.
As long as it's not grape juice, I suppose. Yeah.
Anybody else, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, ice cream is sweeter, but still I had senior doctors suggesting to give a small amount. I've never heard of anyone suggesting to give ice cream. Cats and dogs can be lactose intolerant, just like humans. Not every single cat and dog will, but it isn't great to give a lot of lactose to a fully grown cat or dog, or even a young one. So I can imagine that the lactose and probably the fat content and the sugar content of ice cream is probably not great to give the dog. Niha, was that in vomiting dogs or just as a treat? Did the senior doctor suggest to give? So vomiting. Yeah, so I probably would avoid the ice cream and vomiting. It is high in fat. So if you've got pancreatitis, they might be vomiting from that. You probably want to avoid giving something very fatty. So again, your chicken and rice is much better over ice cream, probably in any situation. You've got a little bit of protein there, and the rice is white rice is easily digestible. Cardiac disease diet, yeah, that's interesting. So in humans, human patients that have cardiac disease are often told to modify their diet, so have less salt, that kind of thing. There was a prescription diet called a cardiac diet, I think, that was put out by Hills, at least I know, and they did have, I think it was reduced salt. I'm not quite sure now because I've never seen it. It's actually come off the market because they found that the nutritional requirements for a patient that has cardiac disease is not that different from a normal healthy patient. So there's no real advantage in changing the diet of a cardiac patient. It's just better managed with your drugs and your monitoring and all those other things. So so as long as a cardiac patient is a healthy weight, a lot of the time they're overweight, and of course that doesn't help putting too much pressure on the cardiorespiratory system. The main thing is to lose weight, get them to a healthy weight, and then they can just have a regular diet. Yeah. Same with the liver disease as well. Hills and Royal Canin do a liver disease diet, but again, it's not super popular, and a lot of liver disease patients don't need to go on it. Again, it's just better, managed with your drugs. Sometimes, having lactulose in the diet as well will just help. If they've got very bad acute liver disease, will help with that. But it's not, again, the liver diet isn't very great. I do have a few slides. Dr. Dixon, I might just share those again. I wasn't going to share them, but I think I will, just because I'm getting a few of these sort of disease nutrition ones. So we'll go back to my PowerPoint. Let's see. Will let me. So there are prescription diets by Hills and Royal Canin for special disease states. There's quite a few of them, but the ones that I use the most in my practice are the ones for, so obesity. Oh no. So this is for arthritis. So in arthritis, we would put them on this joint care diet, JD, by Hills, or Royal Canin Mobility, C2P. These have an increased amount of fish oil, so they're omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acids, which are natural anti-inflammatories, which do help with arthritis. It's actually very similar in humans. Hills has the claim that in 21 days, so in 3 weeks, you should see, in milder cases, an improvement in the movement of your dog. So sometimes in mild cases, that's all you need to put your dog on. Skin allergies, there are these specific diets here. So there's Royal Canin Skin Support, Derm Defense Skincare. These are good for allergies to the environment, where they're always scratching, and well, we have spring and summer there. I'm not sure how your seasons go. If they have food allergies, so if they're allergic to mostly proteins in the diet, then these are elimination diets, so hypoallergenic or ZD, and these will help eliminate or at least diagnose some of your food allergies as well. The dental disease, TD or Royal Canin Dental is very good. It's a firmer biscuit. They crunch down on it, and when they're doing so, it helps to clean the plaque off their teeth. So it doesn't get off the plaque that's already, or the tartar that's already there, but it helps to prevent or slow down the formation of more. And then with your urinary issues, with the chronic kidney disease, kidney care, KD, or Royal Canin Renal, there's a selection here. This is lower in protein and lower in phosphorus, because we know that those two things precipitate or worsen the kidney disease. So we will transition all our renal patients onto this as much as possible. Often you need to do it very slowly, because these patients are often quite nauseous and they don't feel well, and so the last thing they want to do is to eat. a diet that the vet has given. So, but it definitely does help. With stressed cats, which are urinating blood a lot, this is a very good food. It's CD Stress by Hills, and it addresses the stress of the cat as well as the bladder health. And this little metabolic section here also addresses overweight cats. So those are the main prescription diets we use to manage disease. Everything else, I suppose, we don't really need to change the diet for too much. Okay, so you do have the prescription diets there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I see here puppy feeding schedule. Do you mean like how many times per day or the amount per day? In terms of how many times per day, once they're weaned, 3 times a day will be fine for most puppies. Sometimes you can just leave the food out for them as well, as long as you're feeding what it says on the back of the pack. When they get, a few months old, so maybe sort of 5 or 6 months of age, you can just reduce them to twice a day if you need to. And then after that, then you can just feed them once or twice a day. But obviously when they're younger, you want to start off with 3 times, sometimes with very young ones, at least 4 times a day as well. How many times a day? Yeah, exactly. And what to feed? Basically puppy food. Like we said, puppy food for puppies. On the backs of the pack, it'll tell you puppy food, this is suitable from birth until 12 months of age, or from birth until 15 months of age. Okay, so basically just puppy food. They don't need milk. Okay, they'll get milk from their mothers. If they have been weaned very early, or if they their mothers passed away or they've been orphaned, then you need to feed them formula. So not just milk from the supermarket, human milk, but actual puppy formula until you can wean them onto solid food. Yeah, but when they're weaned, just the wet or dry food is fine. They should be able to eat it, and starting off at 3 or 4 feeds per day, then going down to once or twice.
Yeah, if any more questions we have.
Feel free to unmute yourself as well for a question. You got one there, Briar.
Hi, Esther. Just a question in regards to feeding a large breed pregnant bitch. Would you feed her, so in the last trimester, would you feed her a large breed puppy, or would you feed her a normal breed puppy?
Yeah, so just a normal breed puppy one. So the calcium phosphorus ratios are just slightly different, and it does say to feed them this regular puppy food. And even in lactation as well, just your regular puppy food. The puppies, when they're feeding off mum, won't be having enough of this small breed or regular breed puppy food to really make a difference. Once they're weaned, then you wean them onto the large breed puppy food.
So whilst lactating is going on, what would you feed the mum?
Mother, keep feeding her like the puppy food.
Puppy, just normal, and then once the pups are weaned off, then start them on large breed.
That's right, exactly. And by that stage, mum won't really need a large breed adult food. She can just be on her regular adult food. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Just in general, I think a lot of these, we need to think, is this long term or short term? So, with ones you've asked are for hydration, for vomiting patients, is okay to feed them fruit juice. So again, thinking back to the principles, fruit juice has sugar in it. Like I've never done that before, but fruit juice has sugar in it. Fruit juice is mostly water and maybe a bit of fiber if you've got orange in there. And those things should be, fine for a dog. It's not toxic. And in the short term, it's not really going to upset the balance of the nutrition long term. If you were to feed fruit juice every day on top of everything else that you're feeding, yes, it might be getting too much sugar in its diet and it might be too fat, that kind of thing. But short term, these little things won't make a difference. So if you want to feed, a little bit of meat, at the time of a festival in India, so your dog can celebrate your festivals with you. Short term is not going to upset the balance a lot. If you're feeding it this every day, then yes, that will make a difference and it's not recommended. Yeah, I know, a lot of us here also feed a lot of home cooked food, or just, we want to throw things to our animals or let them eat up the rubbish. And again, It's just that long-term being aware of the balance. It's just not recommended, but it's not definitely going to cause disease. And we don't want to tell our clients, if you feed this, if you feed roti, your dog will die. It's not true. It's just not the recommended food, and it's not the proper nutrition for it. But every now and then, it's not going to hurt, just like us.